Hi and welcome to Gamerbloo. Super Nintendo was one of the preferred games when I was a child, experiencing childhood during the 90s. On the off chance that you haven't played these games previously, at that point you're passing up a major opportunity.
Here are my main 5 Super Nintendo games.
Number 5.
Final Fantasy VI or Final Fantasy III. Final Fantasy VI, initially delivered in the United States as Final Fantasy III, was and remained the admired JRPG arrangement generally developed and a nice story. It is additionally one of the most critical stories told. Final Fantasy VI likewise started the agreement's push out of an adulterated dream and into the domain of sci-fi. The universe of Final Fantasy VI regularly blends normal dream figure out of speech, for example primitive towns, swordsplay, with steampunk setting that borderlines on science fiction. This is preferred for the science fiction setting of Final Fantasy VII, a tremendously effective game that is instrumental in bringing pretending game standard in the US. Be that as it may, while Final Fantasy VII may have a bigger after, it fails to measure up to a Final Fantasy VI as a degree of narrating. Final Fantasy VI is ostensibly the best Final Fantasy on the SNES, and some other framework so far as that is concerned.
Number 4.
Number 4, we have Super Mario World. Super Mario World was the principal game to be delivered on SNES and truly outstanding. It is without question the best platformer on the framework. Super Mario World highlighted 96 special levels, the greater part of any platformer on the framework, by a wedge edge. Mario's jump from 8-piece to 16-piece implied prettier illustrations, better controls, and more test level structure. Past Mario games were generally straight games. However, Super Mario World changed that. Stages house privilege in sight and alternate ways, some of which would not just permit you to dodge a huge segment of the level, however would lumps of the game. Stages house privilege in sight and alternate ways, some of which would not just permit you to dodge a huge segment of the level, however would lumps of the game. On the other side, gathering the various things populating each degree of the game required a sharp eye and awfulness with the regulator. This made the game the most loved among speedrunners, and completionists the same, and aided Nintendo harden the quality of organization has placed into the first party games since it entered the computer game in business in '83. In addition, Super Mario World is one of the high purposes of the close perfect of the Super Mario Agreement.
Number 3.
We have Chrono Trigger.
It presumably doesn't come as very remarkable amazement. However, Squaresoft has ruled this rundown. Harking back to the 80s and 90s, the studio was creating probably the best games the studio has ever constructed. It was the period of the JRPG, and Squaresoft was the undisputed ruler of the class. All things considered, Chrono Trigger was a crown gem.
Chrono Trigger is the zenith of the JRPG classification, with faultless music, splendidly placed story, and even interactively that never overpowered players, yet still gave the connecting
Sufficient test. At that point, when it was first delivered on the SNES, the game was idolated by pundits and fans the same. However, it is not just sentimentally that drives the promotion behind the exemplary game. The explanation of Chrono Trigger remains so very much respected is that it has stood the trial of time. Notwithstanding all the cutting edge propels in design and ongoing interaction, Chrono Trigger keeps up its quality and is similarly as enjoyable to play today as it was the point at which it was initially delivered 20 years prior. It's a RPG magnum opus of sorts, and however there are many out there who wonders if Square will ever arrive as the statures they found with Final Fantasy VII. There is similarly the same number of us who started thinking about far before whether Square could ever arrive at similar statures they did with Chrono Trigger.
Number 2.
Super Metroid. Super Metroid is perhaps the best game at any point made, period. What makes the proclaimed title is so uncommon, isn't it? Its consistent world, exact controls, or frustrating riddles, yet the way the game is so easily and astonishingly merged into story with interactivity.
Through most rounds of the time depended intensely on composing exchange and composition to recount to their accounts. Super Metroid utilized the player's activities and ecological structure to recount its story. In most other computer games, battle and puzzle taking, the game portion of the most computer games frequently feels like the ligament integrating the story beats in Super Metroid. Metroid, in any case, each part of the game felt purposeful. Finding a concealed way or thing happened normally as a piece of experimentation. Super Metroid level structured, empowered, and adversaries appeared to be more similar to living other animals than conventional guns feed. Scarcely any games have ever been so fastidiously created and cleaned. From initial minutes on board an abandoned exploration station, Super Metroid made a noteworthy environment, from a creepy soundtrack and an unobstructed tempest on the planet's surface to the feeling of disconnection territories. For example, the wrecked ship could inspire. Zibel's had an unmistakably more obvious feeling of spot than the setting of most games do today, in spite of the whole in-equipment power. While the game's air and unobstructed narrating are amazing, the ongoing interaction is similarly persevering. No other game remains so amusing to play without about 2 decades after its delivery. For hell's sake, not many games nowadays even hold up on a second playthrough. However, Super Metroid, by righteousness of its plan and implements of its equipment, is close undealingly replayable, as obviously confirmed by the game's sound and progressing speedrunning network. Regardless of whether you are pursuing a record finish time or taking in each edge of the world, Super Metroid is delight to understanding.
Number 1.
The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past.
Not many computer game arrangements convey the respect of the computer game industry holds for The Legend of Zelda.
With the sole special case of the Super Mario games, no different agreement creates such reliably extraordinary games and does as such through the span of almost 3 decades, no less.
Their focus to be made for which Zelda game is best today. Numerous individual would contend for the later section, Breath of Wild. Yet for quite a while, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past was the zenith of the arrangement and the best.
A Link to the Past was and is such a cherished game due to the consideration the game provided for ongoing interaction. Of course, it was the beginning for the whole Zelda mythos, presenting ideas like Sage, the Dark World, and the various other story gadgets.
All of which has been additionally investigated and extended in later games. However, A Link to the Past was most important about the current experience. Investigating the extensive grounds of Hyrule and the Dark World felt energizing, as they were pressed to the edge with the privilege inside holding on to be revealed. Minutes like unearthing a strange severn entrance brought to the surge of energy as you considered what kind of privilege insights could be covered up inside. The Legend of Zelda games are known for their prisons, and those of A Link to the Past stay probably the best in the arrangement. The prisons were testing yet reasonable and gathering the exceptional things and the weapons concealed inside each charge link from a green-horned explorer into the Relentless Warrior. Be that as it may, the similar of different games will in general spotlight on the feeling of intensity and demonstration of obliteration. A Link to the Past never felt unwarranted or forceful in its brutality. Accidentally, notwithstanding, going head-to-head against the multiple of the underhanded monster under the Order of Evil Ganon. Battle was consistently auxiliary to investigation and puzzle-taking. Nowadays, computer games depend on the Force Dream to cause players to feel significant. However, A Link to the Past caused you to feel significant in the manner it gave you free reign to investigate all of Hyrule. A demonstration of A Link to the Past, and actually all games in the Legend of Zelda agreement, that the game could make a feeling of intensity and movement, yet remain so honest in the feeling of interest and marvel it ingrained in players. Also, there you have it.
Here are my main 5 Super Nintendo games.
On the off chance that you like what you please like and buy for it more substance and hit the warning chime to see my next recordings. Up to that point, this is Gamerbloo signing